Okay. Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my regular Wednesday nights. Today I have Mary Louise McLaws. I have to apologize to you. I think when I was emailing you, I wrote it wrong. But it's very good to have you on. I really appreciate your company today. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
No, I'm pleased you said yes to me. I know you don't know anything about me, but it is much appreciated. Well, I just wanted, first of all, for you to give us a little synopsis on your life, because I know a tiny bit about you simply because of an interview that I saw you in, and that's what made me fascinated by you. But for those who don't know what you're about, do you want to give like a mini bio?
Sure. So I'm an epidemiologist in hospital infection and infectious diseases control. I've worked at the University of New South Wales for a very long time now. Gosh, probably about 29 years as an academic and a few years before that as a postdoc. And I've been very fortunate that the university has allowed me to do work with the World Health Organization, and that's changed over time, the jobs and the projects. So it's been very exciting. What else can I tell you? I have a couple of children and a husband and a cat.
I love my cat. She died last year, so I'm so glad you still have your kitty. Thank you.
And I like watching TikTok about cats and dogs, because the cat won't let me have a dog. And yeah, that's about it. That's kind of my life. I was brought up by mostly a single mother, and yeah, happy, good life. But a young child asked me the other day, when I was at school, had I thought about being where I am today? And the answer was no. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't having to put lids on cakes. That was my job during school holidays.
Very humbling, very, very humbling work. Builds character.
Very, very. And also, you quickly learn that if you're going to stand on your feet all day, you need 2 pairs of shoes. So that's what I think I was thinking when I was a school kid. I can't be doing this for the rest of my life.
Fair enough. I was working for some time at an accessory store called Kate Hill years ago, and there's a place in Victoria. I'm not in Victoria now. I'm in New South Wales, but in Victoria called Moorabbin DFO, Direct Factory Outlet. There used to be a janitor that worked there, a cleaner. He was always happy. He just always seemed really thrilled to be there. And I'm like, what is up with that guy? Why is he so happy? And I asked him one day, I said, I watch you. I said, I observe you. And I'm like, you're so happy to do what you're doing. He goes, yeah. He goes, I don't care. He goes, I'm just happy to be here. I enjoy my life. I'm here. I'm breathing. And I'm just like, it's what you just said a second ago. It doesn't matter about the service you're doing. It's just, and he was a happy janitor. Like, that's great. It didn't matter. Like, and I always saw that. I always was like, okay, I've got to try to be more like him, like kind of thing.
Yeah. Try to count your blessings.
Yes. I agree.
So, actually, yes. I mean, I really wanted to be a pilot, so I really didn't have health or microbiology or epidemiology or public health in my mind at all. But one thing just led to another. It's just all been one of these things where nothing's been planned, nothing. But the one thing I tell my kids is to acknowledge an opportunity when it comes. When people say to you, "Oh gosh, you work in microbiology, you'd be good at helping me do X," and you think, "Well, that might be an interesting job." So you move into that particular area, and then you find actually you quite love it. So everything has been an interesting opportunity. Sometimes you make your own opportunity, but you do have to observe take them. So when somebody offers you something that's slightly outside your area of expertise or interest, if it sounds like a great opportunity, try it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You go
Yeah,
back
you
to
don't
work.
like it, you drop back
Exactly.
out of it. No biggie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So many years ago, I was working in hospital infection and finishing my master's, and I was
Well
offered
done.
a job in HIV, and it was very new in Australia. Like there was
Oh,
about 100 cases, and
controversial at the time. Yeah.
and I thought, oh, it's way outside my area. But the man that offered me the job was a great inspiration, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun, to work with this sort of person. His
Bit of a
name was,
mentor?
yeah, he was a mentor in lots of ways. His name was David Cooper. He was an immunologist, and he was one of the first very big researchers and clinicians in HIV. So he offered me a job in research, and he said I could do anything I liked. And I thought, this is a disease way outside my expertise. But I had a great, I was really very fortunate because I learned a lot about human behavior, how behavior impacts your health choices. So it was, and I felt I was also providing a service to not just to research, because your research papers soon lose their shine, but your
That's
service,
true, sadly. Yeah.
yeah. So, but it was research service, the service I was giving to the community to try to help them learn and be part of the journey about what the disease was about, how they can protect themselves. So that was an opportunity, and then I was offered the opportunity to put my hand up for becoming an academic. I really didn't want to. I was quite happy doing research, but I thought, oh, may as well go
Why
for the top.
not?
Why not?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so I've had a lot of taps on on the shoulder, so to speak, with opportunities, and some opportunities that I haven't taken up, and some I have. So yeah, it's fun to go into the unknown. Yeah.
For sure. You mentioned something earlier, and I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, but we're living in a day and age, sadly, where color means a lot. And you said earlier that you were not privileged. And you weren't. It sounds like you really weren't. You had a single mother. You had, sadly, a deceased father, at least biological father. You clearly weren't. I don't believe that color makes you privileged or not privileged. What is your response to that? Like, because today, if you're white, you're automatically privileged. I disagree with that notion. What are your thoughts on that? If you're okay answering that.
Yes. Look, I mean, when I was a little kid, I was surrounded by post-war families, very traumatized families without any money, without any family, and they were anything but privileged. That they were safe. So the environment I grew up in was very safe, but we didn't have a washing machine. Fridges were brand new. You had to pay with coins to get hot water. I mean, it was very different, and
I believe you. Yeah.
3 kids living in a sunroom. We had a one-room flat when I was a young kid, so there was no such thing as privacy or your own room, and you watched pennies. Clothes were not something you bought for fun. So you don't have to be of any ethnic or cultural group to be underprivileged.
Absolutely agree.
Particularly now, because the younger adults I worry about a lot because they have multiple jobs just to put food on the table. So they're underemployed, greatly underemployed. They often live in quite crowded conditions, and they sometimes love that, but when they get into their 30s, they don't necessarily want to do that. But the economy is such that they can't afford to live by themselves or even with one other. So I do worry that regardless of of culture or religion that being young is very difficult, and could be considered to be underprivileged economically speaking. Privileged in safety. We're a very safe country, and we've got Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which is wonderful. So we don't see a lot of racism, but it's a struggle for young people, and I really have seen their struggle during COVID. It's been very difficult for them. It's not just the older adults. So yeah, so underprivilege comes in all different colors, religions. Yes, it's just sadly what
We're in
often
agreement there, by the way.
yeah. So so it's just one of those things that I think more and more Australians are finding themselves in difficult financial situation, and the COVID hasn't helped.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah.
Can I delve into a bit of the World Health Organization? How did that happen? Like, how did you get invited to work for them?
So that was another
tap on the shoulder.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was offered a job to do some maternal child health, and it's not my area of expertise.
As usual, but then you become an expert, so then stop saying it.
No, with this one, I said, look, I'm really sorry. I'd like to help, but while I'm in health services, that's not my area. So thanks, but no thanks. And what you have to be very careful about is when you close a door, that you don't slam it closed. So later on, I contacted the World Health Organization and said, look, I was offered this field work to do, but it was outside my expertise. This is my expertise, and I would lay it out. And I didn't hear from them for a couple of years, and then I did. And so they're fortunately they contacted me again and said, look, we've got something for you. So once that has happened, it's led to multiple projects. And just out of interest, I can tell you one of the most difficult projects I ever had was quite recently, where I had to imagine what health services would be like in 2050.
That's random. That seems unnecessary, but I mean, I don't know. That sounds random and unnecessary. I'm sure there's a reason for it, but I'm an ignorant person, obviously.
Yeah. No, there was
you probably understand why that was my reaction. Like, oh, yeah.
No, it was looking at the future, what we needed to do to get there for the future. And the thing that I kept getting distracted by was climate change, and climate change just makes everything about health even worse. So I am very concerned that it's not my area of expertise, but it will certainly impact, and we'll see more pandemics in the future if we're not careful. So sadly, we give you this poison chalice to have to fix, because if you don't, it will be very difficult to constantly cope with the challenge. So there'll be rising tides, there'll be changes in population movement, there'll be a lot of competition for natural resources, including food and safe space. So it really is important, not just for not coping with heat or cold, but all the flow-on effects. So that's why I'm also concerned for the young adults, for this very big issue that we need to fix up before you inherit it.
You sound genuinely concerned for the next generation. You do genuinely sound that. How do you mind if we get into some questions that some of my audience sent me? I didn't read them all, so I'm assuming if you're not comfortable with them, we'll move right along. But before I get to them, I just want to ask you, how do you respond to people who think COVID is fake?
Oh, it's very difficult.
How do you? Because you're in the research, you're there. So how
it is a very difficult process. There's also how do you deal with angry people, and angry people often are frightened, tired, disaffected,
Scared.
and feel scared and feel totally unloved by the system. So when people don't believe COVID's important, and I mean, you'd have to, the world would have to be in on this big conspiracy for it not to be real.
But that's a thing, right? Hasn't that happened
Yes.
before? Haven't there been like the moon landing? Isn't that something that people think is not true?
Yes, that's right. So it's very difficult.
So that's a thing.
Yeah, it is a thing. So the only way that you can deal with it is to try not even to combat their disaffection for science, but to ask them how and why they feel that way. And they often feel very, very disempowered. So that they feel that the authorities are somehow out to manipulate. There are so many more other things that that they could manipulate, and this one was just left of field and just is horrible. So I'm not sure I'm the right person to try to help you and to answer the question of how to deal with them. How I deal with them is how I personally deal with them is give them some facts, not a huge amount, because you don't want to overload them. And
no, enough to absorb a bit.
That's right, and just explain that they're not seeing death in Australia, but there's so much death overseas and so much sickness, and the many things that we are concerned about at WHO, and that is what's called long COVID, where young people who get non-hospitalized, I don't like to call it mild, because I think that's very disrespectful for some of the experiences that people have had, but they haven't been hospitalized with it. They're still very sick. And long COVID is where they feel very sick for 6 to 12 weeks easy. We probably expect them to be sicker for longer. And a lot of them have a heart complication. So you don't want young people to go into middle age already unwell with this enormous challenge. So I try to explain to them why I take it seriously. But then eventually you have to realize that they need to find their own path, that there's a reason why they don't want to accept that this is a real thing. I mean, it's interesting that people are very angry about China, but they were never angry about where HIV came from. They were never angry about where pandemic influenza came from, or Ebola, or MERS, and it's because
I forgot about MERS.
And it's because a lot of those diseases didn't touch mainstream West, and if they didn't touch the mainstream West, then it really wasn't a problem for people. Now this has, and they find it difficult to appreciate that that is the case.
And suddenly they care because it's affecting them. But when it was affecting the third world, or whatever words are the right words, it wasn't. No one was making a big deal out of it. That's a valid point you raise. I never thought of that.
Yeah, or that they now something to try. All of these strategies to try to control the spread is now impacting them personally, and they find that very difficult to cope with because it's never happened before. They haven't lived through war.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Or any civil unrest or terrorism. So they find this very difficult to cope with because it's very upfront and personal, and they've never had to deal with that. They've had a very, very calm life. So you can't work too hard against it because they're just not ready. And,
no. I want to acknowledge something to you, or let you admit something to you that I don't know whether you know, but I don't like wearing a mask, and I rarely wear it because I don't personally believe, and I hope you're okay with me saying this, I don't believe, I'm a dental nurse by trade. A piece of tissue across my face is supposed to protect me from the saliva jumping up at me. I don't wear it to protect them. So there's a lot that I find unusual. There's a lot that I don't get with my knowledge on masks, and there's a fair bit of knowledge I have on that. But and even the what do you call it? Is it the CDC? It's the W. Oh, anyway, is it the CDC? Yeah, they say something along the lines of you don't have to wear the mask if you have a reason not to. But in Melbourne, where I'm born and raised and lived most of my life, people have to wear them in department stores and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is a bit silly to me. And I know you're going with your doctor knowledge. You can probably trump what I'm saying. That's fine. I'm happy for you to counter my argument. I'm not that egotistical that I won't let you. But I'm just simply expressing to you that a piece of tissue over my face or to double mask, it is just utterly ridiculous to me. It just doesn't make sense. And I hope that's okay for me to say that to you.
Well, let me explain about a mask. So
okay, go ahead.
So first of all, the WHO doesn't agree with a tissue, although a tissue.
Oh, I just called it a tissue.
No,
that wasn't me.
Yeah.
So sorry.
So
that was just my way of being a little disrespectful towards the.
That's okay. That's
okay.
So WHO has instructions for people to make their own cloth masks, and it has to be 3-layered to mimic the idea of a very good surgical or what's called medical grade mask.
Which I wear. When I'm working.
Yes. So it has an inner layer that's a polyester that if you rub gently between the inner and the outer layer, you can actually set up a little charge, and that can help stop any of the particles that you're breathing out from escaping the 3 layers, and also what you're breathing in. It's not as superior as the mask that you would wear at work, and that mask is quite complex, and it looks very simple, but if you actually cut it open, it's made out of a special material that filters out what's called the smallest penetrating particles, and strangely enough, they test it with a salt particle, tiny salt particle, to make sure it doesn't penetrate. And there's a layer between the outer and the inner layer that actually repels anything that's gotten through the first layer. Now, at work, you'll be at risk of having small particles coming into your face and up your nose.
Aerosols, yeah.
That's right. But and so that protects you. In public, the reason that we get you to wear them is because people can't very easily identify 1.5 meters. They often get too close, which means the droplets that you're pushing out both aerosolized particles, tiny ones, and big ones. The big ones will fall, but the small ones won't, and they can hang there. So it protects you from breathing them in. And when you're indoors in a hospital or a dental hospital, each room has to have an airflow change at 10 complete airflow changes with 100% clean air every hour. And in a COVID ward, that has to be 12. That's hugely high. So in an average room, like an office room, you might get 5 airflow changes if you're lucky. In a shopping mall, it's very difficult. They're very big, and it won't be anywhere near 10 or 12 airflow changes per hour. So that mask is protecting you from the small particles building up. It's also protecting you from people who don't stand far enough away. And that 1.5 meters is fairly arbitrary. So did you know that flu particles, which are both small and large, can travel 2.6 meters? So
I did not know that. How would I know that? I believe you. I'm not saying, I completely believe I did not know that. I
Yeah,
still don't like
so
wearing the mask because of hypoxia, bacterial pneumonia. What about deaf people? They can't read lips. It is a hindrance. It is. I mean, it would be silly, not of you, but it would be silly for anyone who is associated with the World Health Organization to be like, oh, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's like, no, people have to worry about it. It is a hindrance. And please admit just that. But yeah, I gotcha.
we acknowledge that they're not the nicest things. They really aren't
Yeah,
the
for sure.
nicest things. And certainly it is problematic for people who need to read your lips. That's really difficult.
For sure.
And it's very difficult when you go into a shop with a mask on and somebody behind the counter is hard of hearing and they're wearing a mask as well. And there's no sign to say, can you shout? Because I really can't hear you very well. So they aren't very nice. They get hot, but the testing of them, they test your to make sure that you're getting enough oxygen. So a good mask has to be, it protects you, protects everybody else from you, but it also is breathable so that they actually make sure that you don't have hypoxia. But the other issue that we really want people to wear a mask is that after 3 days after being exposed, 50% of people, while they're asymptomatic in that pre-symptomatic period, before they start getting symptoms, can be infectious to others, quite infectious. So it builds up by about day 3, 4, and 5 before you become symptomatic. You can actually, without realizing it, even just talking, push your particles at least 1.5 meters. It's enormous. And all different size drops, and all different size drops, not just the big ones that fall, but some of the small ones as well.
But say someone gets it. It seems that most people, it has a 99 point something success rate for most age brackets. Like even Donald Trump got over it in like 3 days and back at work. Like it doesn't sound as dangerous. I mean, of course it's dangerous. People are dying of it. I'm not, those people who have passed away, I'm sad that they have suffered. However, the success rate doesn't get talked about. Like, amazing. People let's celebrate these lives that are getting over this new thing. Like, that's a good thing. Like, no one talks about that.
Well, it's that we don't know who's going to get very ill. We don't know, and it's not always the elderly, but it often is. We don't know who will have to go to hospital, who will have to go to intensive care, and who may die, and who will have what's now just becoming very relevant is long COVID or long hauler. And those that didn't go to hospital have the same type of long-term effects as those that did go to hospital. So that tells you that this virus can do a lot of damage to your organs, even if you don't have to go to hospital. And people won't tell you because they're not asked, what was it like? You'll hear those that go, I'm fine, and I'll get back to Donald Trump in a moment, but you rarely hear the stories of, I tried to get out of bed, then I had to go back to bed because I was exhausted just trying to actually physically get out of bed.
They're drained, right? They're drained. They're like, there's no energy in them.
They've got the most shocking lack of energy. They can't breathe, so they can't breathe enough oxygen well enough. They're not sick enough to be put on oxygen, but they probably should be, to actually get down the stairs or get to the front door and even get to their letterbox. So you often don't hear that, and it can be very scary for them. They can be very, very frightened. But getting back to Mr. Trump,
I just used him as an example. I didn't know who else to use. I could have said Prince Charles. I could have said anyone. But
absolutely, he was given what's called monoclonal antibody therapy. So it's therapy that the antibodies that a previous COVID patient has gotten over, built up antibodies, they've taken it out of their body, they've changed it a little bit to increase the number of antibodies, and then they put it into an infusion and they give you a transfusion. They normally only give this to people in hospital who have not been able to start building up antibodies, and so they give them this monoclonal, but Donald Trump got polyclonal. It got more than just, monoclonal, just one antibodies. And he was given it very early on. And
so early intervention.
Very early intervention. Now, that suggests that, well, one, he's highly privileged because he was.
Well, he's a rich man.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He's president. I forgot at the time.
He's the president. Yeah. And secondly, it's disappointing that not everybody could get this. We don't know who probably needs it. And he may have gotten over this without needing it, but he was the president and you can't take that risk. So I thought that he did a disservice to the fact that not everybody bounces back as quickly as he did. And certainly his wife, Melania, didn't bounce back very quickly at all. She was sick for quite some time.
Oh, was she? Okay, I didn't even know that.
So it's a disease that you can't tell how you're going to respond.
I understand that.
Yeah. So that's why we go to so much trouble making sure you never get it. So that and also the other thing that is important why we don't want people to get it is you've heard of the term variant of concern. In other words, a mutation. So they're not sure how these mutations occur other than viruses mutate all the time anyway, all the time. Sometimes they mutate so they're not as problematic and they're not as deadly, and other times they mutate because it's to their advantage that they mutate in such a way that they can continue to get inside the next victim, because otherwise it's the end of their life. So there is a hypothesis at the moment that potentially B117, that is the most common variant of concern, that is now the most common strain in the UK, in Israel, and it's starting to, of course, cross many boundaries. It's been in Australia for a short time through travellers. It has, it's up to 70% more infectious than others. It has an increased likelihood of secondary infections, and they were a little concerned that it might impact the success of the vaccine, but so far it hasn't. But we hear about scientists saying they think that it got into somebody who was immunocompromised. So it had a playground to learn how to develop a way around your antibodies and your normal response to the virus in a person that was immunocompromised. And so the next person it went to, it learned how to be very, very infectious. And the other issue is, of course, we don't want people to catch COVID and after they've been vaccinated until they've developed antibodies, because that's also another potential playground for the virus to learn how to get around a not quite complete antibody response. So if it gets, I'll just finish. If it gets very strong, then we'll be in more trouble. And you really don't want to give this virus any chance.
I understand that, and I don't oppose that at all. What I do want to sort of say is that I don't want to hurt your feelings or anything like that, but I would rather get COVID than the vaccine. I keep seeing people dying of vaccines. One lady died in Portugal. Plenty of people are getting Bell's palsy. Too many bad reactions. I see women shaking, saying after they got it. So many people are dying. People are losing platelets, blood platelets. And then it's like, you need blood platelets to live. This doctor got it. Women who are pregnant are losing their babies. It scares me. I don't want these people to suffer from a vaccine. Go ahead.
You have to be very careful about jumping to conclusions about, sadly, adverse events in life. And if you've had a vaccine, often people like to draw a line between the vaccine and this adverse event.
Yes, that's true. But I don't feel like I'm doing that because I'm fine with other vaccines. It's just this one that
Okay.
scares me. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
I'm not just
yeah.
pulling this out of my ass. I've been researching this stuff. I do interviews. I wanted to interview you because I knew that I would finally get the other side of the story from a professional. So I just want your response on that. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 900,000 Americans every year get a clot. That's huge.
What is that? Oh, a clot, a blood clot?
Clot. Yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah. And in the 6 countries in Europe, it's fairly similar, about 800,000.
Okay.
So it's an event that happens regularly. In fact, it happens when you divide that by the population. That's about 1 to 2 people getting a clot per 1,000.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
It is, yeah.
So when there are 37 at the moment only with AstraZeneca, and you divide that by 5 million doses, because there's a batch that they are concerned about, even that is something like 0.007 per 1,000.
Isn't that one life too many though?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that's
going.
probably happened by chance. That probably would have happened anyway. So the people that get blood clots so it's so rare in the 5 million doses of the batch they're concerned about that it hasn't even reached the level of normal prevalence of blood clots per 1,000.
I think I know what you're trying to say. Okay.
So normally you'll get up to 1 to 2 per 1,000 people with a blood clot.
Okay.
This is 0.007 per 1,000 in this group that's been vaccinated. That's very, very rare. Okay. Then when you divide it by 17 million doses of AstraZeneca, which the Europe and the UK have had, that's like 0.002 per 1,000.
Sorry, I hate numbers.
So tiny. It's so tiny that it hasn't even reached normal background level of what we would expect per 1,000 people. So they're worried about this outcome, but it hasn't really reached a level that's over and above what we would see every day. And yes, it's happened in people that have been vaccinated, but it may well have happened in those people because pregnant women are at risk of blood clots. People that have knee and hip surgery are at risk. Anyone over 45, cardiovascular, cancer, immobility. And in Europe, they're in lockdown and they live in tiny apartments. So there's a lot of immobility, obesity or overweight, smoking, alcohol. So
those are the susceptible.
They're very susceptible. So the 2 people that have died from the blood clots out of the 37 are it's very sad that they have died, but I'm just suggesting at the moment we shouldn't jump into any conclusion because there are 800,000 people in Europe that get a blood clot every year. 800,000, and this is 2. And of course,
I see what you're trying to illustrate.
And the people that are getting the vaccine at this moment are usually the most vulnerable. So it would not be unusual to see the most vulnerable having a nasty outcome, not due to the vaccine, but just through life, because they're at risk of these things. So we have to be very careful. But then I'm going to remind you of the deaths. So just in Europe alone, the total number of deaths are something like 390,000 deaths. And last night, France had 27,000 new cases of COVID.
Active cases.
Italy had something like 23,000 active cases just overnight. Germany had something like 13,000. So what you're talking about is a group of countries that haven't managed their COVID and are going to see a lot of deaths. Now, those people that had the DVTs, they haven't. COVID can also cause DVTs, but they may not be found to be positive for COVID. They could get it because they're at risk anyway. So the reason that we get vaccinated is not just for our own health, it's for everybody else's.
I understand that.
Because we're doing it as a highly philanthropic approach to not only look after ourselves, but any elderly people that we know, our families, and the stranger in the street. And that stranger in the street, someone will know, and is somebody's mum,
someone's daughter, husband.
Exactly. So we're just a little village, and of course we're now seeing a lot of COVID happening in Papua New Guinea. We need to look after them as well, and they need a lot of help with the vaccine. So we need to provide them with a lot of vaccine, and they will get hopefully Australian-made vaccine, AstraZeneca. It'll be made in Australia, and we are so careful. We rarely have any adverse events with any medication because the TGA is so careful. And they were often criticized for being too slow at approving AstraZeneca, but that's because they're very careful. So I understand people's reticence because everything is very emotional at the moment. It's hard work.
Oh, people are more sensitive than usual, for sure.
Absolutely.
No, you're not wrong about that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I, so this is a list of countries that apparently are no longer rolling out the AstraZeneca: Austria, Luxembourg, Norway, Lithuania, Iceland, Latvia, Estonia, Denmark, Romania, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and apparently South Africa and Congo are almost on that list too. Isn't that so many countries agreeing to stop? Isn't that a bit unusual? That's from Channel 9. That's a Channel 9.
Oh no, I've seen the list. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've seen the list, and they certainly are Europe, and
yeah, you're not wrong about that.
Also, there are politics involved as well.
Of course.
In pandemics, and the scientists that I talk to, none of them can pinpoint anything in the vaccine that can cause clots. Certainly COVID can cause clots, but none of the content of that vaccine has any ability to cause a clot. So when you look at the background level of clots, the level in vaccinated people that is so small it doesn't even meet the normal daily level of clots. The fact that none of the content of COVID vaccine or AstraZeneca vaccine can cause it, the risk of death, particularly in Europe, is very high, and the risk of long COVID you just don't know. It's a decision that each individual has to make, and I think that a lot of individuals will eventually make that decision to get vaccinated when they see more people getting vaccinated and having no adverse events.
That's probably true, and then it'll lessen the fear.
So there have been none of those adverse events from the UK. So the adverse events have come from half a dozen countries. The adverse events at the moment are 37. 2 have dead, but 37 compared to 800,000 clots per year in Europe. So you have to wonder, is there some politicking, geopolitics going on?
There's politics in everything, sadly.
There's always politics in everything. And what I'm concerned about is, to be safe is one thing, but to start making people worry when, at the moment, if the number of clots were anywhere near what we would expect in background level, so that or higher, then I too would be saying, let's pause for a moment. But it's the magnitude of the difference of 1
Doesn't
to
meet the standard.
2,000
Doesn't.
just doesn't. The dots to join those lines are so far apart at the moment
Okay.
that I am concerned about geopolitics.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, I'm going to start asking audience questions that they sent in. Before I do that, I just wanted to ask: are you pro-choice regarding the needle, the vaccination? Are you pro-choice, or because I don't think it's fair to force it on people, to impose it?
The only people I believe that don't have, well, I believe in giving people a choice about
Of course.
their approach. And at the moment, the government gives anyone that works in aged care a choice. However, aged care, we had basically just over 200 residential aged care facilities had outbreaks. We had over 660 deaths. And they're our most vulnerable group. I think
they absolutely are.
I think the choice is that if your mother or grandmother or friend was in one of those places that then couldn't go to hospital if they got COVID, because none of them could get to hospital, you would want their carer who can't keep 1.5 meter distance, can't keep a mask on all day long, mostly every day. Their choice is that the government should find them another job, that where they work, give them the choice, you get vaccinated or we'll find you a job outside the industry, because they could potentially bring in COVID without realizing it, because of that period of time between when you get symptoms and when you become infectious to others.
That's a good answer. I didn't think you'd have a solution. I thought you'd just be like, yes or no, but you're like, yeah, they can choose it, but maybe they should get another job. At least you offered a solution to us. I like that. That's a good response. All right, here we go. I'm going to ask you a question by Bill Wagner. He asks, how is COVID different from influenza, including seasonal outbreaks and passing from person to person?
It's a nice question, because influenza has an incubation period of somewhere between 24 hours and 48 hours. So it's a much shorter period of time. And the number of people that the R0 that you can give the infection to in a really bad season, it could be 1.1 people on average. So it's a little difficult. And the reason is that, yes, you can be infectious for 48 hours, definitely 24, and then you get sick and you go to bed. And if you're coughing, nobody wants to be near you. And,
yeah, that's true in life.
Yeah. So, influenza, you've got a really great vaccine, although you've got to have it every year because this wretched virus changes. It kills pregnant women, babies, and the elderly. And it's usually the kids that actually push the season, the flu season. It's the children. They often have fairly asymptomatic flu, and they're very huggy, and they have a lot of friends, and you catch it from the kids, and the elderly grandparents catch it from the kids. So compare that to COVID. COVID, you can start sharing it, giving it to people without you knowing it, so without being deliberate, from day 3, from being exposed. And in fact, there have been the rare case even earlier than that. So 3rd day, that's why contact tracing is so important. It has to be done so fast. You've got to get to every contact before day 3, because they can then start increasing the likelihood of them spreading it. Day 3, definitely day 4, day 5, and then as you become symptomatic, your viral load increases, and of course you become more infectious to others. The R0, the number of people on average that you can spread, I believe we don't have a very good answer for that, because I think it depends on your age group. So 40 to 50% of cases in Australia have been between 20 and 39 years of age. So why? And that's because they're either working multiple jobs, and seeing people. They often have 10 contacts a day. So they're at greater risk of picking it up and certainly a great risk of spreading it because of multiple jobs, and they are sociable because they're supposed to be at that age.
Yeah.
So
That's nice of you to acknowledge.
Yep. So their R naught is probably higher than an older adult who may only see a few people a day. But the overall R naught really depends on the opportunity you give the virus. So we say it's about 2.2, 2.3. It can be 3 easily. It can even be in the right situation at a wedding, 5. So, but normally it's somewhere between 2.2 and about 3, which is much higher than influenza.
Okay.
And of course, influenza, you start getting better in about anywhere between a week and 10 days. And COVID, they believe they have a definition of you getting over it, which is 6 weeks.
Oh, okay. This is a question from Galaxy Explorer. It's like a 2-part question. How can people trust doctors and scientists who have gotten so many things wrong in the past or outright lied? For instance, scientists from Harvard said radium wasn't a health hazard, and all those women who worked in the watch factories died. They said smoking was good for you. That wasn't true. The list is endless. How can we trust doctors that are supposed to be looking out for us when history is replete with reasons why we shouldn't? Go ahead.
I can understand that, but
yeah, he brings up some valid points.
We have improved our understanding of medicine, cause and effect, and
I would agree.
Back in 1918, when we had Spanish flu, and it was called.
Sorry about that, everyone. Sorry, I'm half Spanish.
Well, actually, you didn't cause it. So
good.
The reason it was called Spanish flu is because during the war, the First World War, all the Allies weren't allowed to talk about the enormous toll it had on the young men going to war. And in fact, at one stage, it looked as if they weren't going to win the war because so many young men were dying from Spanish flu or were just in bed, not being able to cope. And the only group that could talk about it, of course, were the Spaniards. So the Spanish.
Gotcha. That's funny. Okay.
And that's how it got the name Spanish flu. So
good to know.
You guys didn't spread it.
Yay!
Yeah. So in those days, they didn't have electron microscopes. They didn't have serology to determine that it was a virus. They really didn't fully appreciate the difference between a virus and a bacteria completely. So they started thinking that it was a bacteria. We're only just starting to get in the 1950s. So that was in 1918. In the 1950s, a good vaccine for polio. So we've come a really long way. Mind you, they were making vaccines with cowpox before then, and that was just by observation of a very observant man, where women who worked with cows didn't get smallpox. So they realized that there was something related to this virus that people were dying from a virus that women working with cows were getting but not dying from it. We've learned an awful lot, and we're still learning a lot. So the example of smoking, absolutely. Gosh, in the 50s and 60s, your GP
that time.
smoke. Oh, gosh.
Pregnant women, you smoke.
Oh, yes,
I think.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And even when I went to university, there was a professor who smoked, and that was in the 80s. So we have come a long way, and we are improving constantly. And it's because more and more people are doing science, more and more people are questioning. Questioning is good.
Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. So the problem is, though, that because we got so many things wrong before, it often makes people a little anxious that we're not getting it right.
But you seem to appreciate the critical thinking of my audience. You haven't yet rejected a question.
No, because I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, you do.
I could give them many examples of where we've got it right. but how it's taken a very long time sometimes to get it right. Now, can I get back to the vaccine for just a second?
Of course, please.
Really
The floor is yours. I'll try not to interrupt.
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead. One of the most important things, well, one of the things that people often fear is that they think that the vaccine's been rushed. And normally a vaccine can take a decade.
I'm one of those people, by the way.
Yeah, well, let me assure you that the reason that we've been able to see the data from phase 1 in the lab to phase 3 in humans and then rolling it out to the rest of the world in so as we're seeing in AstraZeneca, is that there were so many people around the world, because it's a pandemic, that were willing to put their arm out to be a volunteer. So Brazil had so much death that they've run out of where to bury people. It's really that bad. So when somebody offered them to be a volunteer, they put their arm out, because it's very hard for to get ethics approval to go into phase 3 human trials, and they've gotten approval from not only the ethics committees that looked after each one of these vaccines that have been developed, but W.H.O as well, and then the in-country group would have approved it as well. So Brazil would have approved it, Europe, many countries where all of the volunteers put their hand up or their arm out. And so that's why we've had tens of thousands of people to be able to then have a look at the results so that we can then say, wow, this is safe. And actually, we didn't get anyone with a deep venous thrombosis. We got people with headaches or arm pain. So my point is that the reason that it appears to be rushed is only because of the good nature of the tens of thousands of people who were willing to be a volunteer.
Noted, for sure. Let's see, what other question? From Peter V. What is their updated true position regarding mask mandates, restrictions, and vaccines? I think he's meaning WHO, the World Health Organization.
Oh, okay. So WHO updates its guidelines regularly only when there's new evidence. So when there's new evidence, or there's a discussion within the group of experts around the world from not just America or UK or Europe, but from the Americas, Africa, Asia. We have people from all over the world giving their position as well. No one gets bullied into a view where, given the evidence, there are groups that are very good at examining large numbers of papers, and then presenting it to us, and then we make a decision about whether or not the evidence is high enough, is solid enough to then make a change in the guidelines. And we made a change in the guidelines for masks, saying that they should be worn on public transport, because there's been outbreaks, not just of COVID, of other respiratory infections in buses in the US, some famous ones in China with COVID, because most buses have a very low airflow change of about 3 per hour. So it's very low. And the way that the airflow changes, sadly the bus driver usually gets all of the air as it's going through to be cleaned, and for new air from outside to come in. So to protect the bus driver and to protect all of the travelers whenever there's circulating infection. So we changed that. When some of the countries, the poor, low, middle-income countries, weren't being able to get their hands on a medical grade mask, WHO then looked at how people could make a mask and came up with a 3-layered mask with particular water repellent material on the outside, soft material on the inside, and a particular type of material on the middle. It's easy to find, polyester, that can be gently charged, and that can fit around the face. So we look at that. There's a group of virologists that look at the vaccines and go through all the evidence to make sure that all of the pharmaceutical companies have kept within their protocol, that it's safe, and that's by really absolutely top world famous virologists and vaccinologists. And they often come to the group I'm on and they share all their information. So they update only when there's really top level evidence.
Okay.
They don't make guidelines based on possibilities.
Okay. I just thought of a question on my own. For some time, people were saying, other doctors that I guess are not approved by the World Health Organization and that kind of thing, but they had hydrochloroquine or something like that.
Yes.
And it was working, but then they were shut down and censored. Why would you censor a group of people who figured something out that was slightly alternate just because the World Health Organization says something, it doesn't mean that another doctor hasn't figured out another way. Okay, do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
There are 8 themes, 8 groups at W.H.O, and one of them is therapeutics, so treatments for COVID, and they examine all of the evidence from all of the drug trials around the world, and there are many centers looking at therapeutics, and that particular one was found not to have any significant improvement in death.
But didn't they have a 98% rate? That's what they said. Are they lying?
Certainly I wasn't witness to that, no. One of the other issues was that chloroquine is okay in very low dose, but
yes, that's true. In a high dose, it can kill, right?
In a high dose, it's very dangerous for your kidneys.
Sure.
So they could only test it to a certain level before it became toxic. So at the level of safety, it was compared to what was happening at the time with basically standard treatment, it didn't reach significance. So
okay, just thought I'd ask.
Yeah. So I've got the data. We have these very long meetings where the experts take us through all of these multi-center trials and share the information. And sadly, many months ago, last year, it was not looking very helpful. We were very disappointed because it would have been cheap and potentially a way out of the problem, but no.
Okay, so I've got a question from Alex Green. How do members of WHO professionally and personally deal with the flood of online misinformation concerning the coronavirus pandemic?
So WHO has developed a infodemic, and you can get onto WHO and type in infodemic, and it teaches people how to talk about some of the issues that are misrepresenting science. So they see that the misinformation is just as dangerous as the disease, and they are taking this very seriously. It's difficult because in countries where there's freedom of speech, you can't stop people from talking about it.
Of course not, yeah.
But you can try to share with the public as much information as you can get, and the more you share with the public, and honestly, the better informed they become. And they might need a particular person who might not be a government a representative or me. It could be somebody else that they trust. But I believe in open discourse and open data sharing.
As evidenced by the fact that you're here and I'm opposing you as politely as I possibly can, and we're doing it quite easily. It's fine. Like, you seem to like me, I like you, it's fine. Like, if everyone could do it this way, it would be a better world.
Yes, I think so. Being respectful.
I think so, yeah. All right. Did you finish, or did I interrupt you? Did you need to finish that statement?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so let's have a look. From Nathan Dunning, did they overreact when China was panicking? That's all he wrote.
Okay. So let me take you back in history a little bit.
Okay.
So every year, China gets what's called acute pneumonia, acute community-acquired pneumonia.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay.
We don't see it very often. We sometimes see viral pneumonias, where the numbers of viral pneumonias in the community increases some years, and sometimes it's there. But it used to be called decades ago walking pneumonia. People can have a little viral pneumonia without realizing they feel shocking, but it's actually a pneumonia. But in China, they get a really, really bad one. And the same thing happened in 2002, just leading up to SARS outbreak in 2003. They thought they were dealing with a community-acquired pneumonia, but in fact it was completely different. It was SARS, so SARS-CoV-1. And the same thing happened this year. So in December, they had some miners, some copper miners, who got very sick and died. They didn't. The first thing people often think about is common things happen commonly. This is a nasty pneumonia, and these people worked in a mine. Maybe they had pneumonia. Then their lungs weren't so good. Then they started getting more, and there were a few hundred. So they quickly told WHO in January, and they shared the genetic sequencing of what they understood they had. Now, in December, they could have had many more cases than you and I know about. And in fact, if you looked at the data that was being presented by Harvard, so Harvard had this nice desktop dashboard, and all of a sudden in January, the numbers of deaths went up, the number of cases. And that wasn't China gaming the system, that was China going back and looking at all of the medical records and the deaths and thinking, actually, that's now what we call COVID. So they adjusted the numbers. The US adjusts numbers, the UK, everybody adjusts their numbers often, particularly at the beginning of an outbreak. And the same thing happened during SARS. So then WHO had to make a decision about, was this what's called a public health emergency of international concern? And legally, every country that's a member has to, respond.
It's our bedtime.
Yeah, has to respond with preparation when a FEC, a public health emergency of international concern, is called. And it's a very serious thing. There's only been, really a handful of public health emergencies of international concern since 2003. And it's taken seriously. WHO, as in staffers, don't make that decision. It's the member countries. So member countries like Japan or the US or UK or...
So it's like a panel, a sitting panel of different countries.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a panel of different countries. They come together, they look at the numbers, they look at the death rates, and they take it all into consideration, and they think, is this a FEC? And they met twice in January 22, 23, and they couldn't agree. So then the head of WHO went and visited China, to Beijing, came back with, with new information,
Yeah.
and decided that in fact it was a public health emergency. So it was called on the 30th of January. Now that's the important part. That's the
Excuse me. Yeah. I don't know what's happening to us. Yeah.
So that's when legally you start making changes. You start getting the community ready. You start getting a plan. You start
Okay.
organizing your hospital beds, etc. You start training your healthcare workers for something that is going to be potentially a pandemic.
Sure.
You don't. The term pandemic is only a WHO term, and it basically means it's crossed two administration regions. It has no legal ramification. So that wasn't called until March, but it was the FEAC that our country and every other country should have responded rapidly to.
Okay.
And we responded.
Are you saying that sorry, is your answer to the question that you didn't panic at all, that it was quite a slow response, or are you saying the opposite? I'm a bit confused as to.
I'm saying that the WHO.
Because the context helps. Yeah.
The WHO members couldn't come up with a decision themselves.
Okay. It was inconclusive, is that the word?
So it was for a few days, and then they decided by the 30th of January, and they called it immediately. So that was a month. So there was a month by the time after they were told. So 4 weeks. Now, at that stage, there was only a few hundred cases outside of China. And we in Australia have had 28,000 cases, and we have 0 now. And we didn't do anything magical that most outbreak managers wouldn't have done. And that is close borders, ask people to stay at home, wear a mask, hand hygiene, keep your distance. If you're not feeling well, get tested. Simple. So the US had 700 cases by that stage at the end of January, if my memory serves me well. They could have done the same thing. So my point is that each country that's in a problem at the moment, and that's all of Europe, the UK, and the USA, are now realizing that they did not do what they were legally obliged to do, and that is respond on the 30th of January. So
okay, I appreciate that.
The whole world did not respond fast enough. We responded by closing our borders to China, but we should have closed our borders to everybody because the Chinese have holidays and they'd already left. So the Chinese holidays started around the 23rd, I believe, of January. Now, at that stage, they were concerned, but they made a decision that may not have been wise in hindsight. They decided not to call an end to the China Lunar New Year for fear that everybody would rush home and the tens of thousands of people coming together on planes and trains would cause an enormous problem. So they extended the holiday season to allow people to come home slowly. Okay. Now, I've traveled on a train from Hong Kong to just Shenzhen to go shopping, and it is incredibly packed.
It's hot. It's hot when there's all these bodies together. Ugh. Not my cup of tea.
Yeah, so if they had have actually closed down the Lunar New Year holiday, can you imagine they would have had an even bigger problem, possibly. Or maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe had they said, everybody put a mask on and come home.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I had a phone call then and it stopped the recording. Can you hear me okay now? Hello.
Can you hear me, see me?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that scared the hell out of me. All right, so you're talking about the lunar,
Lunar New Year.
Yes,
so it's very
scared me.
Yeah. So it's very difficult to know in hindsight whether they should have cancelled Lunar New Year on the 23rd.
Gotcha.
They asked everybody to come home with a mask on. I mean, nowadays we have a third of the plane full when we are trying to get Australians back to stagger them. So it would have been incredibly difficult. However, China now has one of the fewest cases per million population.
They do.
They ring fence Wuhan. We also have one of the best case numbers per million. Taiwan, Hong Kong was doing pretty well. Singapore, not as good as us. Of course, our beloved New Zealand. So all of those countries that responded rapidly, that took it seriously, have done very well. And the countries that didn't think it was going to happen to them, that were a little naive or had bad leadership and therefore bad followership, are now in a very difficult place with a lot of deaths.
My cousins in Colombia, well, I interviewed my cousin in Colombia because she's a nurse and she's also a psychologist. And I was saying to her, I was being a bit different with her than I was with you. I was being a lot more passionate and a lot more anti-mask. But with you, because you're so gentle, I don't want to be but with her, I was like, well, I didn't understand. Why do you wear the mask? It's just a tissue over the face and blah blah blah. You know what they do there? They something, I don't know what the word is in English, but in Spanish it's cédula, and basically the cédula means that if you're an even number, so you have 5 days a week, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If your cédula ends in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, you have to go out that day, get your groceries, and come home. I don't know what the word for that is in English because I'm in Spanish brain when I do that. But
date of birth, maybe, or
is that what that means? Date of birth,
cédula,
sure. Maybe
it could be date of birth, or it could just be your address. So you want
something like that. Yeah. And what bothered me about hearing that was that, and I don't know whether you share my feeling on this as a concept at large, but I don't like the idea of being controlled. I understand that we need to help each other, but I don't like the idea of being controlled to that degree. It's like in today's day and age, if you want to go exploring, you need to file all these things to go exploring, whereas in days of old, if you want to just go exploring, say Antarctica or something random like that, you just go. Whereas now, paper. It's like we're being controlled so much, and it bothers me for in terms of just general freedom. Just that concept is gone now. That we don't have that anymore because we're being told what to do on so many different levels. I have to pay for my car registration every year. Why? I own my car once. Why do I have to pay for admin to keep it every year? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think you know what I'm asking. I just don't know how to articulate it properly. Do you have a response to that?
Look, I do, but it's not necessarily, for the free-spirited person, it's not necessarily going to be an easy listen. So
for sure.
Those days of being able to just go out and camp where you want to, which were lovely, those days are gone because the population size has changed. And everything that you do and everything I do has an impact on the next person. So to be able to ensure that we are treading lightly on somebody's choice, there has to be some rules and regulations. It's when you start making too many rules and regulations on somebody's freedom that it's difficult to accept. So for example, an American wouldn't accept our idea of what is freedom of speech. So I believe
or guns.
Yeah. So I believe you have freedom of speech as long as it's not hate or racist or, some anti-religious groups. And so
plenty of anti-Christians out there, I tell you.
Yeah. So my version is, speak respectfully, and an American wouldn't see that. So each country has a red line in the sand, and we have to, as look after the common good because we are so interconnected. So the car that you drive needs to drive on a good road, and so your registration pays for, yes, some administration of the person behind the desk, but also pays to make sure that your road doesn't have bumps,
potholes.
That's right. Has stop signs, has has street signs, and etc. So so when we live in an interconnected lifestyle, we have to take the good and the bad. I do think that then people need to be able to be given time out from that constant feeling of control, and they need to find that space within themselves where they do what they want, where they don't feel somebody's controlling them all the time. But with COVID, because we don't know we're infected, if we knew we were infected the instant we got something, then you could feel that you could take responsibility for it, wear the mask, etc., stay at home. But because there are potentially 3 or 4 days when you don't know that you're placing somebody else's life at risk, that's when you need to be told, you've got to keep your distance, you can't push around, in that line waiting for the cashier, you have to wear a mask because you could be breathing out a lot of particles. So, and of course, everyone would like you to have a vaccine so that you have less risk of passing it on or getting sick and passing it on. So it is difficult, and it's difficult for a population of young people who have had so much freedom, and this is the first time. I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like to live through a war where all your food is rationed, wherever you go is rationed. Your home is now a home to complete strangers who've lost their home. So there was, and you couldn't get new clothes, and you had to get a piece of paper to go and buy something new all the time, or you weren't allowed to out at dark. So that for 5 years would have been horrendous. So yes, I can appreciate the feeling, because this is the first time the generation has had this feeling, including mine. I mean, my generation grew up with a fear of nuclear war, that our parents had just been through the Second World War and annihilation. And so I have lived through a very Cinderella period. But I have seen it change for different groups, for HIV, for Ebola, for SARS, etc. But this is the first time that it personally has put an impost on all of my friends and everyone I know, their lifestyle, and it's tough.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, this is a little unrelated, but it's still kind of in the same ballpark. You believe, as an individual or as a member of W.H.O. or whatever it is, that we should be taking care of each other, right? Mm-hmm. On some level, yeah? Like, yes. Do the right thing for everyone else, domino effect type of thing, right?
Yeah, correct.
What about women who... Because I'm pro-choice with the needle, but I'm pro-life with babies. I believe once you have a baby, aside from maybe someone who's had it done to them and they didn't want it done to them through being violated, I believe that once the baby's there, your rights are forfeited because you are a mother. You are a mother. That baby should be everything. What do you think about that? I know it's sort of unrelated. I just was wondering whether you, as a mother, whether you're pro-life, whether you believe that baby deserves to live because all life is important.
Life is very important, but I think it's very difficult for me to put my beliefs onto somebody. That's why even when
I'm going off the Bible, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So and each person may interpret their religion differently or their situation very differently. So I don't like to impose on people, but I like to give them a choice. So the choice is, if you're pro-choice, pro-life, then no one would force you to have an abortion. If you're anti-vaccine, you need to be given a choice on how you're going to deal with that so you don't put other people at risk. So get a different job, or make sure you wear a mask, or get tested every other day with a rapid antigen test to make sure that when you're caring for a patient with their mouth open, and even though you've got a mask on, that you're not placing them at risk. So if there's a way around an issue that is equally safe for everybody else, then that's great.
Okay.
So that's
Good
what
choice.
WHO tries to do, is try to give people a choice. For example, when we were developing alcohol-based hand rub as an alternative for healthcare workers to be able to hand hygiene very rapidly instead of constantly going to a sink, there were a number of people who were very observant Muslims who didn't want to use alcohol-based hand rub. So they can use soap and water. That was the choice for them. Or we also had an imam who was an expert, of course, in the Quran and interpreted the Quran for the healthcare workers, that it was not against the Quran to use alcohol on skin preparation or even
Just to drink it. Okay.
an alcohol-based medicine they could take. So that helped that community appreciate. If they still felt anxious, they had the choice of using a medicated soap and water. So if you don't want to take the vaccine, then you will probably have fewer options to travel, because airlines can make that choice on who they accept, and they will,
that's
no
pretty
doubt,
shitty. Yeah.
make the choice that you have to have had a vaccine and a test to show you're negative. So it's pushing you in the direction of a vaccine.
It is. That's a little bit, what's the word? It's like they're compelling you, even though, there's not,
That's right. They will compel you. Now, eventually, if this virus, and if most of the 7.7 billion of us on this earth get vaccinated, then you won't have much of a problem, and that need for a vaccine to travel will have disappeared. Like, you don't need a smallpox vaccine anymore. So when I was young, I had to have a smallpox vaccine to travel. You don't need that anymore. But that'll be quite some time. So it'll be a choice that will be foisted upon you if you need to travel, possibly, unless they accept that if you have a PCR test and potentially a rapid antigen test at the airport and you're negative for both of those, they may well allow you to travel.
Interesting. All right, let's see what the last question is. To what extent, Derek Shepard, to what extent did China sponsor Dr. Tedros' education and his projects in Africa? I don't know who that is. And then it says, in light of the failures of WHO to give useful, this guy's very, timely advice about China's virus to an unprepared world. You kind of answered part of this already. To what extent would there be a benefit in nations with like values establishing another international health advisory organization, thereafter reducing funding to the World Health Organization to a minimum? Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know it was such a aggressive question. Do you have a response to that, or would you rather not respond?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
What they have to understand is that each country membership pays for that membership. And WHO is pretty underfunded when it comes to looking at a major health organization around the world. The funding that they use to feed starving kids, to roll out vaccines and TB treatments. I mean, without WHO, there'd be a lot of suffering in the world. Now, people have an issue with China. I don't know about Dr. Tedros' relationship with China.
Do you know who that is?
Yeah, Dr. Tedros is
I've never heard of him.
director. He's the director general of China. And people often have the misunderstanding that China makes the decision about calling a public health emergency of international concern. No, the member countries do. The panel, as you quite rightly pointed out, the panel
Yeah.
makes that decision, not
Mm.
Dr. Tedros, not the staffers, the countries like us, the representative who be one of us, who may be on that committee, make all those decisions. One thing that WHO does try to do is to never shift blame to a country for an outbreak. So
That's all China was doing.
well, that
according to the headlines, if you want to believe the headlines,
okay,
which
so
we know is often fake.
yes, well, if you're blamed for something, you're going to respond in a very emotive way.
Yeah.
And when there was the outbreak of HIV, nobody placed blame on a country. And quite rightly, no one placed blame for Middle Eastern respiratory disease because the West didn't get it, so they didn't care. So there's this idea that we need to name and shame. Now, I'm not of that belief because I think it's not helpful. Certainly, China will know how it happened, and they will make sure it doesn't ever happen again.
Yeah.
And so I understand that people are concerned about China, but I think some of it's unreasonable and some of it is fairly racist because if COVID had never come to Australia or America, for example, you'd hear very little of this. You just wouldn't hear about it because there's this Western arrogance that if it doesn't affect me, I don't care about it. It's a disease that affects the Asian Pacific region. So I can just imagine a world without WHO, and it wouldn't be an equitable world. There would be many people dying. There would be many more outbreaks of multiple resistant TB, for example, cholera. All of the diseases that you shouldn't die from, there would be many more, and you wouldn't want to travel. There would be no way you would travel to Africa or Asia with a risk of TB, for example, but you can because of WHO. So you'd have to find a group that would also have an organizational structure that would have to answer to the members. So you basically have WHO. Now, you might want to have a different director just to have the belief or the perception that things have changed. But I think we need to change our perception that this has happened. We're getting over it.
It's done now.
It's done now. And now we need to move on and work out how we can protect people. So, but that's just my
Stance.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does worry me. I'm not going to lie. I've moved from Melbourne to New South Wales because I couldn't believe that Melbourne was in lockdown for 8 months. I found that to be far too extreme, but I never experienced it because I was in New South Wales when it was happening. So when I only went back to visit family when it was no longer under lockdown. But apparently Sydney will be implementing what you kind of alluded to earlier, the passport system. You cannot eat here unless we know you've been vaccinated. You cannot, this, you cannot that in whatever place. I don't like that. I find that to be overboard. You don't need to know my health history. It's not your issue. Like in the Bible, when a leper had leprosy, you didn't quarantine the whole population, just the leper. So
well, actually,
I don't know if you're religious at all, but like I use Bible references because they parallel today.
Yeah. Go ahead. So there are many examples where, in fact, in the Middle Ages, they would actually ring fence entire villages because they understood that that people in the village could have
a disease
that they didn't know yet, but it was highly infectious and highly deadly. So, bubonic plague. The plague was in Justinian's time in the 500, AD or BC. There were many examples of ring fencing of entire villages, and entire villages would actually give up their life because the risk of death was great. So there are many cases of that, and that's where we learnt the idea of ring fencing. From history, absolutely. So I'll just remind you that even though you don't want to discuss your health and have...
Well, it's no one's business if I've had hepatitis. I mean, I haven't. I don't know why I used that example.
But remember, if you're infectious to somebody and you don't know it, then you could be placing somebody you want to sit next to in a restaurant or in the gym at great risk without even knowing it accidentally. So you're carrying a time bomb. And
the asymptomatic theory, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we want to make sure that time bomb's turned off. Have you been vaccinated? So the likelihood of you carrying a time bomb is very minimal. So that's why we have to give up a certain amount of independence during this period of time.
But the thing is that what you're saying about the vaccine, I'm reading, and I hope this is not true, and I hope you'll say that it isn't, but I've read that despite being vaccinated, you'll still need to wear a mask, you'll still need to adhere to all those things. Then what's the point? It doesn't do anything. Is that wrong?
No, you're quite right. Because in stage 3 phase of drug trials, they didn't test for evidence that there was what's called transmission blocking capacity. So if you're vaccinated, you can't transmit it to others. But given that it stops severe disease or symptomatic disease, the likelihood of it stopping you from spreading it is quite high. It just hasn't been tested yet. And this is what we'll find out soon with 17 million people with AstraZeneca, etc. And so I get your point, but we're all going to have to wear a mask, certainly at least for the first 14 days after getting the first dose, because you won't be fully protected and you don't want to get the virus to enter a playground so it learns how to get around your antibody response. But eventually, once everybody's vaccinated, then there'll be loosening up of all of that. And my battery is going to die in a moment, so I'll have to finish up.
No, I mean, I've had you for more than I expected to. I'm so sorry about that. I hope the discussion was enjoyable. Was it?
Yeah,
did you?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, good.
So I hope I've helped your listeners. I probably haven't been able to answer every question.
Of course not, but that's okay.
But I just I hope that it gives them an understanding of outbreak management from a pandemic perspective, and how it's difficult to control without everybody being on board. It's very hard.
I understand that perspective, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on. It was extremely kind of you and generous to give your time to talk about your family, to talk about your personal experiences and to how you got here, and for shedding some light on some questions that many people have. I really appreciate it. You've been very kind.
It's my pleasure. Stay well, stay safe. And,
you too.
And I hope all your viewers stay well and safe as well.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Just end the broadcast.